The message came at midnight, Earth time. Admiral Elena Cross stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the blue marble of Earth spin slowly beneath her. She had served in the fleet for 28 years. She had seen pirates, border conflicts, and the cold silence of deep space. But she had never seen anything like this. The hologram in front of her showed the seal of the Galactic Assembly, a circle of stars representing the 12 founding species. Below it, text scrolled in every known language. The words were simple. The meaning was terrible. All member species will surrender 15% of their population for integration processing. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will result in corrective action. Cross read it 3 times. Her hands did not shake. Her voice did not waver. But inside her chest, something cold and heavy settled like a stone. "Get me Secretary General Taro," she said. "Now." The connection took 6 minutes. When Taro's face appeared on screen, Cross could see he had not slept. His gray hair was wild. His eyes were red. But his voice was steady. "You received it." It was not a question. The whole fleet received it. Every ship, every station, every colony. Cross paused. "What are we going to do?" Taro was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, Cross could see advisors running back and forth, their faces pale with something close to terror. Finally, he spoke. "Come to Geneva. We need to talk." The emergency summit began 7 hours later in the Great Hall of the United Earth Council. Representatives from every nation sat in their seats. Some shouted. Some cried. Some simply stared at nothing. The hologram of the Assembly's message hung in the air above them like a death sentence. Taro stood at the center of the room. He was not a tall man. He was not loud or dramatic. But when he raised his hand, the room fell silent. "We all know why we are here," he said. "The Galactic Assembly has given us an order. They want 15% of our people. That means 1.2 billion human beings. Our children. Our parents. Our friends." A woman in the front row stood up. Her name was Minister Yun, and she led the Asian Coalition. Her voice shook when she spoke. "What happens to them? The ones they take?" Taro looked at her with sad eyes. "We don't know. The Assembly calls it integration. Some species say those who are taken become servants. Others say they are changed, made into something else. A few say they are simply used up." The room erupted in noise. People screamed. Some demanded war. Others begged for negotiation. Taro let them shout for a full minute before raising his hand again. "There is more," he said. "An emissary is coming. They will arrive within the hour to personally oversee our compliance." The emissary's ship was beautiful and terrible. It descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, burning bright against the morning sky. When it landed in the plaza outside the council hall, the ground shook for miles. Ambassador Vel stood inside. The being was nearly 3 meters tall, made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. Its voice was like wind chimes in a storm, beautiful but cold. "Secretary General Taro," Vel said, "I bring greetings from the High Council. I am here to assist with your compliance." Taro walked forward to meet the ambassador. He had to crane his neck to look up at the towering figure, but he did not step back. "Ambassador Vel, thank you for coming. But I'm afraid there has been a misunderstanding." Vel's crystal body flickered with light. "Misunderstanding?" "Yes." Taro's voice was calm. "We will not be complying with the Council's directive." For a moment, nothing happened. The plaza was silent. Then Vel made a sound that might have been laughter. "Secretary General, perhaps you do not understand. This is not a request. In 12,000 years, no species has refused. Those who considered refusal no longer exist. Their worlds are dust. Their names are forgotten." Admiral Cross watched from the steps of the council hall. Her hand rested on the weapon at her hip. Around her, soldiers stood ready, their faces hard. Taro nodded slowly. "I understand completely, Ambassador. I understand that you have destroyed civilizations older than our sun. I understand that your fleet could turn Earth to ash in hours." He paused. But we will not give you our people. Vel's light grew brighter, harsher. You are young. Your species has been part of the assembly for only 2 centuries. You are children playing with fire. Do you truly wish to burn? We are not children, Taro said. We are human. And human beings do not sell their own. The ambassador was silent for a long time. When it spoke again, its voice had changed. The music was gone. Only cold remained. You have 30 standard days. When that time ends, the enforcement armada will arrive. 1,000 ships. Each one carries enough power to destroy a planet. You will comply, Secretary General, or you will cease to exist. Vel turned and walked back to its ship. The crystal body left deep footprints in the plaza stones. As the ship rose into the sky, Taro watched it go. Cross walked to his side. That could have gone better. Taro almost smiled. Almost. It went exactly as I expected. The Armada will come. Yes. We can't beat them. Not with our fleet. Not with our weapons. Taro turned to look at her. His eyes were tired, but something burned in them. Something that looked like hope. Then we will have to find another way. The news spread across Earth within hours. People gathered in the streets, in their homes, in places of worship. Some prayed. Some protested. Some simply held their families close and waited. In a small apartment in Seoul, an old man named Junho sat with his granddaughter on his lap. She was 5 years old, with bright eyes and a laugh like bells. She did not understand what was happening. She only knew that her grandfather was holding her tighter than usual. "Grandpa," she said, "are the star people coming?" Junho kissed the top of her head. "Yes, little one. They are coming." "Are they nice?" He thought about lying. He thought about telling her everything would be fine. But Junho had lived through wars. He had learned that children are stronger than adults think. "Some of them are nice," he said. "But some of them want to take people away. People like you and me." The girl's eyes went wide. "Will they take me?" Junho held her closer. "No. They will not take you. Your grandmother and I, your parents, all the soldiers and all the leaders, we will not let them. Promise." He looked out the window at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, a fleet was gathering. Somewhere out there, beings of crystal and shadow were planning the end of everything he loved. "Promise," he said again. Across the world, the same promise was being made. Parents to children. Leaders to citizens. Soldiers to those they protected. It was a promise that might be impossible to keep. But it was a promise that defined what it meant to be human. In Geneva, Secretary General Taro stood alone on the balcony of his office. The city lights spread out below him like earthbound stars. He had just sent a message to every human colony, every ship, every station. The message was simple: we stand together. We do not kneel. He did not know if they could win. He did not know if they would survive. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it on its feet. The countdown had begun. The galaxy had never been so quiet. For 3 days after humanity's refusal, the communication channels between star systems fell almost silent. Species who had chattered endlessly for millennia suddenly had nothing to say. They were waiting, watching, holding their breath. On a world of eternal twilight, far from Earth, a being of living shadow sat upon a throne of frozen starlight. High Arbiter Morvath had ruled the Galactic Council for 8,000 years. He had seen species rise and fall like waves upon a shore. He had ordered the destruction of civilizations that dared to challenge the order he had built. And now, for the first time in centuries, he felt something he did not recognize. It took him a moment to name it. Curiosity. "Play it again," he said to his servant. The hologram flickered to life. Secretary General Taro stood in the plaza, small and fragile, looking up at Ambassador Vel. "We will not give you our people." Morvath watched the human's face. There was no madness there. No ignorance. The man knew exactly what he was doing. He knew he was signing the death warrant of his entire species. And he did it anyway. "Interesting," Morveth whispered. He raised one hand of shadow and darkness. Send the message. The enforcement armada will deploy in 27 days. And prepare my flagship. I will lead them myself. My lord, his servant bowed low, is that necessary? The humans are primitive. Any commander could. I said. Morveth's voice dropped to a whisper that filled the chamber like thunder. I will lead them myself. The servant fled. Morveth turned back to the hologram, watching Taro's face freeze in the final frame. He had crushed 1,000 rebellions. He had burned worlds that thought themselves invincible. But something about this was different. These humans knew they would die. And they refused anyway. He wanted to see that for himself. He wanted to understand it before he destroyed it. On Mars, in a research station buried deep beneath the red soil, Dr. Mira Chen had not slept in 4 days. The laboratory around her was a mess of screens, wires, and empty coffee cups. Her team of 12 scientists worked in shifts, but Chen never stopped. She stood at the central console, her fingers flying across holographic controls, equations scrolling through her tired eyes. "Run it again," she said. Her assistant, a young man named Dae Sung, looked at her with concern. "Doctor, that's the 53rd simulation. You need to rest. Run it again." Dae Sung sighed and pressed the button. The simulation played out on the main screen. A field of energy expanded outward, folding space itself like paper. Ships caught in the field vanished, not destroyed, but moved. Pushed into a pocket of folded spacetime where they could not escape. Stable for 0.8 seconds, Dae Sung reported. Then collapse. Not enough. Chen muttered. We need at least 5 seconds for battlefield use. What if we increase the power input by 15%? The generator would explode. Then we build a better generator. Dae Sung opened his mouth to argue, but the look in Chen's eyes stopped him. He had seen that look before. In soldiers. In survivors. In people who had nothing left to lose. "Yes, doctor," he said quietly. "I'll start the calculations." Chen turned back to her screen. The enforcement armada would arrive in 27 days. She had 27 days to do the impossible. She had done impossible things before. A small transport ship dropped out of hyperspace near Jupiter. Its engines were old. Its hull was scarred from decades of travel. But the man inside was worth more than any warship. Marcus had left Earth 40 years ago. He had been a young diplomat then, eager to learn about the galaxy's many species. He had lived among the crystal beings, learned the poetry of the singing ones, debated philosophy with the machine minds of the Cynthian collective. He had also listened. For 40 years. In markets and temples and quiet corners. He had listened to what the galaxy really thought about the Council. Now he was coming home. Admiral Cross met him at the Jupiter station. She did not know Marcus personally, but she knew his reputation. He was the man who understood aliens better than any human alive. "Thank you for coming," she said, shaking his weathered hand. "We need your help." Marcus smiled, a tired smile, but warm. "I came as soon as I heard. What you did, what Taro did, I never thought I would see it in my lifetime. You think we're going to die. I think you started something. Something that cannot be stopped, no matter what happens to Earth." He paused. "But I also think we have a chance. A real chance." They walked through the station corridors toward the command center. Around them, soldiers and civilians hurried past, all preparing for the coming storm. "What kind of chance?" Cross asked. Marcus lowered his voice. "The Council presents itself as united. 12 species ruling together in harmony. But it's a lie. Most species in the galaxy are not on the Council. They are beneath it. Servants. Slaves in all but name. I know this. But do you know that many of them hate the Council? That they dream of freedom but are too afraid to act?" Marcus's eyes gleamed. "I have spent 40 years building relationships with these species. They trust me. And when I told them what humanity did, they wept." Cross stopped walking. "Are you saying they would fight with us?" "I'm saying they are waiting. Watching. If we can survive the first blow, if we can show them that resistance is possible, they might find their courage. That's a lot of mights and mays. It's more hope than we had yesterday. Secretary General Taro received Marcus in his private office in Geneva. The two men had never met, but they understood each other immediately. They were both gamblers. They both believed that sometimes you had to bet everything on a single hand. "Tell me about the Council's weaknesses," Taro said. Marcus sat down heavily. "The Arbiter's power comes from fear. Every species is afraid to move first. But fear is not loyalty. The moment that fear breaks, everything changes. And how do we break it? We survive. We fight. We show the galaxy that the Armada can bleed." Marcus leaned forward. "But there's something else. Something that could change everything." He pulled out a small data chip and placed it on Taro's desk. "What is this?" "A contact. Someone inside the Council itself. A human." Taro's eyes widened. "That's impossible. The Council doesn't allow humans in their inner circles. This one was taken as a child during an integration from one of our colony worlds. She grew up in the Arbiter's own household. She has access to everything. Fleet movements. Security codes. The Arbiter's personal schedule." Marcus's voice grew soft. "And she wants to help us. She has been waiting her whole life for someone to say no. For someone to fight back. She contacted me the day after your refusal." Taro picked up the chip. It was small and cold in his hand, but it felt like hope. "What's her name?" "Hannah. Her name is Hannah." Far across the galaxy, in a tower of black glass that overlooked an ocean of stars, a young woman stood at a window. She wore the simple gray robes of a servant. Her face was calm. Her hands were steady. But inside her heart, a fire was burning. Hannah had been taken from her colony when she was 6 years old. She remembered very little of her human life, just fragments. The smell of rain. Her mother's voice singing a lullaby. The feel of grass beneath her bare feet. The Council had raised her, trained her, made her into a perfect servant. She poured drinks for beings of shadow and crystal. She organized schedules for creatures that had lived for millennia. She was invisible, unimportant, beneath notice. That was her greatest weapon. She watched the stars and thought about the message that had echoed through the galaxy. A human voice, calm and clear, saying the words no one had dared to speak. "We will not give you our people." Hannah had cried when she heard it. For the first time in 20 years, she had cried. Now she was done crying. Now she was ready to act. She pulled out a small device, a communication unit she had built herself from stolen parts. She activated it and began recording. "This is Hannah. I am ready. Tell me what you need." She sent the message into the void and waited. Somewhere, she knew, someone was listening. And soon, the Council would learn that even the smallest servant could change the fate of the galaxy. 20 days remained. Secretary General Taro stood before the broadcast console in the deepest bunker beneath Geneva. Around him, technicians worked at their stations, preparing the most important transmission in human history. This message would not go to Earth. It would not go to the human colonies. It would go everywhere else. "Are we ready?" Taro asked. The lead technician, a nervous young woman named Yuri, nodded. "The signal will reach every inhabited system in the galaxy within 6 hours. The Council can't block it. We're using quantum encryption they haven't cracked yet. They'll crack it eventually. Eventually. But by then, everyone will have heard." Taro straightened his simple gray jacket. He had thought long and hard about what to say. He had written speeches and thrown them away. In the end, he decided to speak from his heart. "Begin recording." The red light blinked on. "My name is Taro. I speak for humanity. But today, I am not speaking to humans. I am speaking to you, all of you, every species in every corner of this galaxy." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The Council has ordered us to surrender our people. We have refused. In 30 days, they will send the enforcement armada to destroy us. We are young. We are weak. We will probably die." Another pause. "But before I die, I want to ask you one question. Just one. He looked directly into the camera, as if he could see every being in the galaxy watching him. Why do you obey? The question hung in the air. The Council tells you that obedience brings peace. But what kind of peace requires you to give up your children? What kind of order is built on fear and silence? You have obeyed for 12,000 years. Has it brought you happiness? Has it brought you freedom? His voice grew stronger. We are not asking you to fight. We are not asking you to die. We are only asking you to think. Think about whether this is the galaxy you want. Think about whether your children deserve better. Think about what would happen if everyone said no. He smiled, a small, sad smile. Maybe we are fools. Maybe we are children playing with fire. But we would rather burn than kneel. And if even one of you, somewhere out there, feels the same way, then we did not die for nothing. The red light blinked off. Yuri looked at him with tears in her eyes. That was beautiful, sir. It was honest, Taro said. Now send it. Let the galaxy decide. The message spread like wildfire. On the water world of Vaniprime, beings of gentle light gathered in their underwater temples to listen. They were empaths. They could feel emotions across vast distances. When Taro asked his question, they felt the weight of 12,000 years of sorrow pressing down upon them. Many wept. Some began to sing songs of mourning that had been forbidden for millennia. On the harsh desert planet of Karath, warriors gathered around their communication screens. The Korii were proud and fierce. They had been conquered by the Council 5,000 years ago, their empire broken, their honor stolen. When Taro asked his question, the old warriors looked at each other. They did not weep. They reached for their weapons. In the cold depths of digital space, the Cynthian Collective processed the message in nanoseconds. They were machine minds, logical and precise. For thousands of years, they had calculated that resistance was futile. Now they calculated again. The variables had changed. A small species, insignificant and doomed, had introduced chaos into the equation. The Cynthians began running new simulations. And everywhere, in every corner of the galaxy, ordinary beings whispered to each other in secret. They shared the message in hidden channels. They discussed it in quiet corners. They asked each other the question that had been forbidden: what if we said no? Admiral Cross met with Fleet Commander Vance aboard the Horizon's Edge. The war room was full of holographic displays showing the positions of every human ship, station, and colony. It was not an impressive sight. 247 combat vessels, Vance reported, his voice flat and professional. 63 support ships. 12 orbital defense platforms around Earth. Another 8 around Mars. Cross studied the display. Against 1,000 ships in the Enforcement Armada. Each of their capital ships was roughly equivalent to 50 of theirs. Their fighters were faster. Their weapons had longer range. Their shields were stronger. I understand, Commander. Cross held up her hand. Tell me what we can do. Vance was silent for a moment. He was a small man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He had earned those scars in a dozen battles along the frontier. He was the best tactical mind humanity had. We can't win a straight fight, he said. But we can make them pay for every inch. Defensive formations around Earth and the colonies. Hit-and-run attacks on their supply lines. Make it hurt. How long can we hold? Days. Maybe weeks if we're lucky. Cross nodded slowly. What about Dr. Chen's project? Vance's expression shifted. Something like hope flickered in his cold eyes. I reviewed her latest report. If she can get the Horizon Gate working, it changes everything. We could trap their ships, break their formations, create chaos. It might give us a real chance. It might. It's better than nothing. On Mars, Chen was pushing her body to its limits. She had not slept in 6 days. Her hands shook from too much coffee. Her eyes burned from staring at screens. But she could feel she was close. So close. Increase power to the stabilizers, she ordered. Bring the containment field to maximum. Daesung worked the controls, his face pale with exhaustion. Around them, the laboratory hummed with energy. The prototype device sat in the center of the room, a sphere of metal and crystal barely 2 meters wide. Power at maximum. Containment field holding. Activate the fold. The sphere began to glow. Space itself seemed to bend around it, like water swirling down a drain. Reality twisted, stretched, folded. 1 second, Dae-sung called out. 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. Fold is stable. The glow faded. The sphere sat quietly in its cradle. Chen stared at it, hardly believing what she had just seen. "We did it," she whispered. Then she collapsed. Dae-sung caught her before she hit the floor. "Someone get a medic." Chen's eyes fluttered. She was smiling. 5 seconds, she mumbled. "That's enough. That's enough to change everything." Far across the galaxy, Hannah sent her first real transmission. She stood in a storage closet deep in the Arbiter's tower, her stolen communication unit pressed against her ear. The message she had received was simple. "Send us everything." So she did. Fleet positions, ship specifications, security codes for the Armada's communication network, the Arbiter's personal schedule for the next 30 days, weaknesses in the command structure, names of officers who were secretly sympathetic. It was everything she had gathered in 20 years of silent watching. Everything she had memorized, stolen, hidden away. She sent it all to a relay station near the galactic rim. From there, it would bounce through a dozen systems before reaching Earth. The Council would never trace it. When she finished, she leaned against the closet wall and closed her eyes. She had just committed treason. If she was caught, the punishment would be worse than death. The Arbiter had ways of making examples of traitors, ways that could last for centuries. But she did not regret it. Not for a moment. She thought about the colony where she was born. She could barely remember it now, just flashes of green fields and warm sunlight. Her parents' faces were gone. Their voices were silent. But she remembered one thing. She remembered her mother holding her close on the last night, whispering in her ear, "Never forget who you are. Never forget where you come from. Someday, someone will come for us. Someday we will be free." Hannah opened her eyes. Someday was now. Back on Earth, Marcus received Hannah's transmission. He read through the data, his weathered face growing more and more amazed. "This is incredible," he said to Taro. "With this information, we can predict their movements. We can target their weak points. We can actually fight back." Taro looked at the data scrolling across his screen. Thousands of pages of secrets, all given freely by a woman he had never met. "She's risking everything," he said quietly. "She knows the risk. She chose to take it." Taro was silent for a long moment. Then he made a decision. "Prepare a return message. Tell her we received everything. Tell her we're grateful." He paused, searching for the right words. "And tell her she's not alone anymore. Tell her that whatever happens, she's coming home." Marcus nodded and began typing. Across the galaxy, in a tower of black glass, a young woman in gray robes received a message that made her cry. For the first time in her life, someone had called her family. She was not alone anymore. And soon, the galaxy would know that hope had a new name. The 30th day arrived. Admiral Cross stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the edge of the solar system through a wall of screens. Her fleet was arranged in a single line at the boundary of Neptune's orbit. 247 ships, small and fragile against the darkness of space. Behind them, 8 billion people waited on Earth. Another 2 billion on Mars and the colonies. All of them watching. All of them holding their breath. "Detection systems are picking up hyperspace distortions," reported Lieutenant Jiho, the young officer at the sensor station. His voice was steady, but Cross could see his hands trembling. "Multiple signatures. Big ones. How many? Still counting." Jiho paused, his face growing pale. "Admiral, I'm reading over 900 capital ships, plus support vessels, plus fighters." Cross felt her stomach drop. 900 capital ships. Each one could destroy a planet. Each one was older and more powerful than anything humanity had ever built. "They brought the whole armada," she said quietly. "Almost the whole armada." Commander Vance stepped up beside her, his scarred face grim. This is overkill. They want to send a message. They want to make an example of us. Yes. Cross straightened her spine. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it. But nothing could truly prepare you for seeing 1,000 ships of death emerging from the void. Signal the fleet. All hands to battle stations. And open a channel to Secretary General Taro. Taro's face appeared on screen. He was in the command bunker beneath Geneva, surrounded by advisors and military officers, but his eyes were calm. I see them, he said. The whole galaxy is watching. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to address the Armada. Taro nodded. Do it. Let them hear us one more time. The channel opened. Cross knew that her words would reach not just the Armada, but every ship and every world in the galaxy. Billions of beings were listening. She took a deep breath. This is Admiral Elena Cross of the United Earth Fleet. I am speaking to the Enforcement Armada and to High Arbiter Morveth. She paused, watching the wall of enemy ships grow larger on her screens. You have come to destroy us. You believe this will be easy. You believe we are weak and young and foolish. Perhaps you are right. Her voice hardened. But we will not run. We will not beg. And we will not surrender a single child, a single parent, a single soul. You may destroy us, but you will never own us. And the galaxy will remember what happened here today. She cut the transmission. For a long moment, there was silence. Then a new voice filled the bridge, deep and cold, like the void between stars. Admiral Cross. I am High Arbiter Morveth. I have ruled this galaxy for 8,000 years. I have destroyed civilizations that thought themselves eternal. Your words are brave, but bravery will not save you. Cross did not flinch. Then come and take us. With pleasure. The Armada's first wave broke formation and accelerated toward the human fleet. 200 capital ships, each one a mountain of metal and fire. All ships, prepare to engage, Cross ordered. Launch fighters. Activate point defense systems. The space between the fleets filled with light. Missiles streaked through the void. Energy beams carved lines of destruction across the darkness. Human fighters swarmed around the massive council ships like insects attacking giants. And the horizon gates activated. Dr. Mira Chen watched from her laboratory on Mars, her eyes fixed on the battle display. The first gate opened directly in the path of the advancing enemy fleet, a circle of twisted space glowing with impossible colors. 50 council ships flew into it before they could stop. They vanished, pulled into a pocket of folded spacetime. Gone. Not destroyed, but trapped in a prison of their own momentum. The Armada stopped advancing. For the first time in the battle, the enemy hesitated. It worked, Dai Sung whispered beside her. It actually worked. Chen allowed herself a small smile. Open the second gate. And the third. Keep them guessing. More gates opened across the battlefield. Council ships scattered, trying to avoid the deadly circles of warped space. Their perfect formation broke apart into chaos. On the bridge of the horizon's edge, Cross watched the impossible happen. The Armada was retreating, actually retreating, as the horizon gates tore holes in their advance. We're hurting them, Vance said, wonder in his voice. We're actually hurting them. But Cross knew it couldn't last. It's not enough. They have 1,000 ships. We have 12 gates. Eventually, they'll adapt. Then we need to make every moment count. The battle raged for hours. Human ships fell, dozens, then scores. The colonies on the outer planets sent distress signals as council landing parties broke through. Mars came under bombardment. Commander Vance led a desperate counterattack against the Armada's flank. His task force of 30 ships crashed into a formation of 200 enemy vessels, destroying a dozen before being surrounded. Commander, pull back! Cross shouted over the communication channel. You're too deep in their lines. Vance's face was bloody, his bridge filled with smoke. Negative, Admiral. If we pull back, they'll reform. They'll overwhelm the gates. Vance. It's been an honor, Admiral. His voice was steady. Peaceful. Even. Tell the Secretary General. Tell him I believed. Until the end. His ship, the Iron Dawn, turned toward the heart of the enemy formation. Every weapon fired at once. The screens went white. When the light cleared, the Iron Dawn was gone. But so were 47 council ships. Cross closed her eyes for just a moment. Then she opened them again. All ships, close ranks. Protect the gates. We hold the line. Far away on the other side of the galaxy, Hannah watched the battle unfold on a stolen screen. She sat in her small closet, tears streaming down her face, watching humans die by the thousands. And she watched something else, too. She watched the reactions of the other species in the Arbiter's household. The Valonese servants were weeping openly, their light pulsing with grief and hope. The Korii guards stood rigid, their hands on their weapons, their eyes burning. Even the Scythian maintenance unit seemed different, slower, more thoughtful, as if processing something that did not fit their calculations. They were watching humanity fight, and they were being changed by it. Hannah's communication device buzzed. A message from Marcus. It's happening. The Korii fleet has launched. The Valonese are broadcasting support. The Scythians are calculating new probability matrices. Hold on. Help is coming. She read it 3 times, hardly believing. Then she stood up, wiped her tears, and walked out of the closet. There was one more thing she could do. One more secret she could steal. The Arbiter's private command codes. The ones that controlled the Armada's central communication network. It was suicide to try. But Hannah had already decided she would rather die free than live as a slave. She walked toward the Arbiter's chambers, her heart pounding, her steps steady. Back at the battle, the tide was about to turn. Admiral Cross was preparing for a final stand when the sensors screamed with new alerts. Hyperspace signatures. Lieutenant Jiho shouted. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. Cross's blood ran cold. More council reinforcements. It was over. But then Jiho's voice changed. Admiral, they're not council ships. What? Korii war fleet, 300 vessels. Valonese medical cruisers, 50 ships. Scythian battlespheres, 200 units. Jiho was laughing, tears running down his face. They're broadcasting on all channels. They're saying they stand with humanity. The new ships dropped out of hyperspace like an avenging storm. Korii warriors screamed their ancient battle cries as they crashed into the Armada's flank. Valonese vessels began evacuating wounded from human ships. Scythian spheres calculated optimal attack vectors with cold precision. The Armada, caught between 2 forces, began to break. On his flagship, High Arbiter Morvath watched his fleet crumble. For the first time in 8,000 years, he felt something he thought he had forgotten long ago. Fear. He looked at the human ships, battered, burning, still fighting. He looked at the species that had joined them, slaves who had found their courage. And he understood. This was not a battle he could win. Not today. Not anymore. Signal all ships, he said, his voice heavy. Retreat. The orders spread through the Armada. One by one, the great ships turned and fled into hyperspace. The galaxy fell silent. And then, from a billion worlds, a sound began to rise. It started as a whisper. It grew into a roar. It was the sound of hope being born. The Arbiter's flagship hung alone in the void. Behind it, the scattered remains of the Enforcement Armada limped away into hyperspace. Ahead, a wall of ships blocked every escape route. Human vessels, Korii warships, Scythian battlespheres, and dozens more from species who had found their courage. Morvath stood on his bridge of shadows, watching his empire crumble. For 8,000 years, he had ruled through fear. Fear of his power. Fear of his wrath. Fear of becoming nothing. Now that fear was gone. And without it, he had nothing. A communication request appeared on his console. A human frequency. He considered ignoring it. He considered one final attack, going down in fire and darkness, as befitted a ruler of his stature. But curiosity won. The same curiosity that had brought him to this battle in the first place. Accept, he said. Secretary General Taro appeared on screen. The human looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes and lines of grief on his face. But his voice was steady. "High Arbiter Morvath, I think it's time we talked." Talked. Morvath let out a sound that might have been laughter. "You have destroyed my fleet. You have broken my alliance. What is there to talk about?" "The future." Morvath was silent for a long moment. Outside his ship, the Allied fleet waited. They could destroy him with a single concentrated attack. He knew this. They knew this. "Speak, then," he said at last. "I will listen." Taro leaned forward slightly. "You asked us to surrender our people. Instead, we offer you something else. A seat at a new table. One where every voice matters. One where compliance comes from respect, not fear." "A new table." Morvatha's voice was cold. "You would rebuild the Council?" "No. The Council was built on domination. We want to build something different. An assembly where every species, young or old, strong or weak, has equal standing. Where no one is taken against their will. Where order comes from cooperation, not conquest." "And you believe the galaxy would accept this?" "I believe the galaxy is tired of being afraid." Taro gestured at the fleet surrounding Morvatha's ship. "Look at them. The Korii, who you conquered 5,000 years ago. The Velani, who you silenced. The Cynthians, who you controlled. They came here to fight beside us. Not because we forced them, because we gave them hope." Morvath looked at the ships outside. He saw the Korii war fleet, the descendants of warriors he had crushed long ago. He saw the Valani medical cruisers, the children of empaths he had forbidden to sing. He saw the Cynthian spheres, machines who had calculated that freedom was worth more than survival. "You are asking me to give up everything," he said. "I'm asking you to become something new." Taro's voice softened. "You have ruled for 8,000 years. You have seen civilizations rise and fall. You have wisdom that no one else possesses. That wisdom could help build something better. Or it could die here today, meaning nothing." "And if I refuse?" Taro's eyes were sad but firm. "Then you will be remembered as the last tyrant of a dying age. And we will build the future without you." The bridge was silent. Morvatha's servants stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Finally, the Arbiter spoke. "Your species is young. Barely children by galactic standards. And yet you have done what no one else dared to do in 12,000 years." He paused. Perhaps children see things that old beings have forgotten. Perhaps there is wisdom in your foolishness. His hand moved to the console. One by one, the weapon systems of his flagship powered down. "I accept your offer, Secretary General. Not because I believe you will succeed. But because I want to see what happens when someone finally says no, and survives." Taro allowed himself a small smile. "That's all we ask." The months that followed were chaotic and beautiful. The old council dissolved. Some of its members fled to distant corners of the galaxy, clinging to their dying power. Others, like Morvath, chose to adapt. They sat at new tables, listened to new voices, learned new ways. A new assembly formed in the ruins of the old. Its charter was simple: every species has worth. Every voice matters. No one is property. Admiral Cross became the first human to sit on the governing body. She found herself debating policy with beings of crystal and shadow, negotiating treaties with machine minds, learning the poetry of the singing ones. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying. But she remembered Commander Vance. She remembered the Iron Dawn burning bright against the darkness. And she kept fighting, not with weapons now, but with words and patience and stubborn hope. Dr. Mira Chen shared the Horizon Gate technology freely. She released every equation, every blueprint, every secret. When asked why, she simply said, "Power should never belong to just one species. That's how tyrants are born." The technology spread across the galaxy. Ships could travel faster. Trade flourished. And no single fleet could ever dominate again. Marcus returned to his travels, but now he went as an ambassador of the new assembly. He visited worlds that had been silent for millennia, bringing news of the changes. Everywhere he went, he told the same story, the story of a small species that refused to kneel. And Hannah came home. The transport ship landed in Geneva on a spring morning. The sky was blue. The air smelled of rain and flowers. Hannah stepped onto the landing platform, her legs unsteady, her heart pounding. She had not set foot on Earth since she was 6 years old. She remembered almost nothing of it. And yet somehow it felt like coming home. Secretary General Taro was there to meet her. He looked older than he had in the broadcasts, more tired, more worn, but his smile was warm. "Hannah," he said, taking her hands. "Welcome home." She could not speak. Tears streamed down her face. After 20 years of being invisible, of being nothing, someone was seeing her. Someone was calling her family. Taro led her through the city, past crowds of people who stopped to watch. They did not know who she was. They did not know what she had done. But somehow they seemed to understand that something important was happening. They reached the great plaza outside the assembly hall. The same plaza where Taro had faced Ambassador Vel so many months ago. Now it was filled with beings of every species, humans and Koryai and Cynthians and dozens more. They had gathered to hear Taro speak. He walked to the center of the plaza, Hannah beside him. The crowd fell silent. "Friends," he said, his voice carrying across the plaza and out to a galaxy that was listening. "We gather here today to remember what happened, to honor those who fell, and to look forward to what comes next." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "They asked us why we refused, why we chose to stand when standing meant death. The answer is simple." His voice grew stronger. "Every soul has the right to choose. Every being, human or alien, young or old, strong or weak, has the right to decide their own fate. This is not just a human belief. It is a universal truth. And today, the galaxy has finally embraced it." He turned to Hannah. "This woman spent 20 years in the heart of our enemy. She risked everything, her life, her safety, her very soul, to help us survive. She is not a soldier. She is not a general. She is just one person who refused to give up hope." Hannah felt the eyes of the crowd on her. She wanted to hide. She wanted to run. But Taro's hand was steady on her shoulder. "That is what humanity offers the galaxy," he continued. "Not strength. Not weapons. Just this, the belief that one person can make a difference. That hope is never foolish. That the future belongs to those brave enough to fight for it." The crowd began to cheer. The sound rose and rose until it seemed to shake the very sky. Hannah looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, on worlds she had never seen, beings of every shape and kind were hearing these words. They were standing a little taller. They were believing a little more. The galaxy was no longer silent. And somewhere in the quiet of her heart, Hannah heard her mother's voice singing a lullaby. She had almost forgotten. She closed her eyes and smiled. She was finally home. In the years that followed, travelers to Earth would often visit the plaza in Geneva. At its center stood a simple monument, a stone pillar inscribed with 3 words. "We said no." That was all. Just 3 words. But those words had changed everything. 1 year after the battle, the plaza in Geneva had become a pilgrimage site. Beings from across the galaxy came to stand before the simple stone pillar inscribed with 3 words, "We said no." They came to remember. They came to hope. They came to touch the monument that marked the moment the galaxy stopped being silent. Admiral Elena Cross stood at the edge of the plaza, watching the crowds. Beside her, Secretary General Taro leaned on a cane. The past year had aged him. The weight of leading humanity through its darkest hour had carved new lines into his face. But his eyes were still calm, still steady. "You should be resting," Cross said. "I should be a lot of things." Taro smiled. "But the galaxy doesn't stop turning just because I'm tired." They walked together through the plaza, past families and diplomats, past soldiers and servants, past beings who had once been enemies and were now something else. A group of Koryai warriors stood by the monument, their heads bowed in silence. They had traveled across the galaxy to honor the humans who had died alongside them. "Do you think it will last?" Cross asked quietly. "This peace?" Taro was silent for a moment. Peace isn't something that lasts. It's something you build. Every day. Every choice. Every time you decide to talk instead of fight. He looked at the monument. We showed the galaxy a different way. Now they have to walk it. Cross nodded. She thought about Commander Vance. About the Iron Dawn burning bright against the darkness. About all the faces she would never see again. Was it worth it? All those lives. Taro stopped walking. He turned to face her, and for a moment, he looked like the man who had stood in this plaza and stared down an ambassador of crystal and shadow. Yes, he said simply. Because now my granddaughter will grow up in a galaxy where no one can take her. Because now the Koryai sing again. Because now the Valani light shines brighter than it has in millennia. He paused. Because now, when someone says no, the galaxy listens. Across the city, in a small apartment with a view of the mountains, Hannah sat at a kitchen table. Across from her sat an old woman with gray hair and kind eyes. The woman was crying. Hannah was crying too. "I thought you were dead," the woman whispered. "They told us you were dead. All these years." "I'm here now, Mother." Hannah reached across the table and took her mother's hands. "I'm here." They had found her family through the colony records. Her parents had never stopped searching. Her father had passed away 5 years ago, still hoping. But her mother had waited. "I watched you on the broadcast," her mother said, standing next to Secretary General Taro. I knew it was you. The way you stood. The way you held your head." She squeezed Hannah's hands. "My baby girl. My brave, brave girl." Hannah had no words. She just sat there, holding her mother's hands, listening to her talk about brothers she had never met and a nephew who had her smile. The apartment was small and warm and smelled of cooking. It smelled like home. In the new assembly chamber on a neutral world, representatives from 73 species gathered for the first formal session. The room was circular. No thrones. No elevated platforms. Every seat was the same height. Every voice carried the same weight. Admiral Cross took her seat among beings of light and shadow, crystal and flesh, machine and dream. Across the circle, High Arbiter Morvath sat in quiet contemplation. He had not spoken much since the surrender. But he had listened. That was enough for now. The first order of business was a resolution condemning the practice of integration processing in all its forms. It passed unanimously. The second was a proposal for mutual defense, not against each other, but against anyone who would threaten the freedom of any species. It passed unanimously as well. Cross looked around the room. She saw the Koryai representative, a scarred warrior who had wept when the battle ended. She saw the Valani ambassador, whose light pulsed with quiet joy. She saw the Scythian delegate, whose calculations had led her people to freedom. And she saw the empty chair beside her. The one reserved for Commander Vance. The one that would always remain empty, in honor of all who had fallen. "We will not forget," Cross said quietly. The room went silent. Then, one by one, the representatives repeated the words in their own languages. "We will not forget." That evening, Taro sat on his balcony, watching the stars appear in the Geneva sky. His granddaughter, now 6 years old, climbed onto his lap. "Grandpa," she said, "are the star people still coming?" Taro hugged her close. "Some of them, yes. But they're not coming to take anyone anymore. They're coming to visit, to learn, to be friends. Like the ones in the plaza. Just like them." The girl was quiet for a moment. Then she pointed at the sky. "Is that where Commander Vance went?" "Up there." Taro felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes, little one. That's where he went. He was brave. He was the bravest." They sat in silence, watching the stars. Somewhere up there, a new galaxy was being born. A galaxy where a small blue planet had refused to kneel, and the whole universe had learned to stand. The monument in the plaza would weather and age. The names of the fallen would fade from memory. But the words carved in stone would remain. "We said no." And because they said no, no one would ever have to say yes again. The galaxy was no longer silent. It was singing.